great degree are our problems, and that the future work must be on problems that are from other cultural contexts in connection with other problems like a renewed sense of sustainability or the new technologies that are coming online and that we have to work with. So my talk today, although it's now called Exploring Translation Studies, Theories, is really about how we use translation and theorizing about translation to solve problems. And I'm asking myself, do we need, for example, an Asian set of theories or a Japanese theory or a Rico University theory or an Australian theory? Or do we need specific theories because there are different places? Or do we need new work to try to solve new problems? Where does equivalence come from? Well, the assumption that languages are equal, the age when orality has demised as the main means of transferring texts, and the printing press means we have a fixed press. All the mistakes I made here are printed here, and I can't change them. That's frustrating for authors, but actually, for the first time, when you have the printing press, you can be equivalent to something. Prior to the printing press, a translator had to go and establish the source text, that is, collect different manuscripts, compare the variations, and decide which was the source text that was going to be translated. The printing press says, there it is, and there you are. It's easy to see a relation one-to-one. Printing was very important, and the national vernaculars started their standardization process, which was also a direct consequence of the printing press. They had to learn how to spell. They had to decide how to spell. So equivalence really belongs to the age of equality between languages, that is, nation-states, the printing press, and a standardization of languages. That's equivalence. That applied in the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s. It hasn't really been questioned enough until today. Why was European translation theory so enamored of equivalence in the late 20th century? Well, here you go. They needed laws that were going to operate in different languages and still have the same validity. If you do that, you need to assume equality between languages. You need to assume juridic equivalence, at least. They had to train mediators who could be legally trustworthy. And not say, I put this because it sounded nice. Or, I think it's more elegant this way. Or, I have developed the language in... No. You had to produce a certain invisibility in the mediator in order to assure the legal regime of equality. And at the same time, intellectuals were profoundly influenced by structuralism, which suggested that culture and the humanities could be analyzed scientifically. Those three things, probably more, came together and formed a regime, a common notion that translation was the production of equivalence. Translation theory only had to concern equivalence. In Europe, in those years, I'm talking about Vinet-Dabelnet and all the comparative linguists who worked at the period, through to Otto Kader, the Leipzig School, etc. Quite in parallel, but in a different, Eugene Neider is a missionary. He wants to get people to read the Bible in the jungles. It's a completely different problem. He says, how can I prove to you that the God speaks your language And he goes out to the Eskimo, the Inuits, people up in the cold part, and he says, the Lamb of God, Agnus Dei. And they say, I don't know what a lamb is. I've never seen a lamb. So he says, well, it's the seal of God, and a seal is as good as a lamb. Okay, and this is an example of cultural adaptation or dynamic equivalence. And he says, look, if they understand that a seal has the same function as a lamb, if they understand the message, that's good enough. I'm bringing God's word to them. Or Moses came down from the hilltop. And it was a hearty handshake all around. In the Bible, they kiss each other. But for some cultures, you can't have men kissing each other, so it's a handshake all around. Okay, they understand it. Cultural adaptation. And the native or Inuit exclaims, I didn't know God spoke my language. Well, he didn't, but Nujinaida does. Okay. Evangelical equivalence, or what we do call dynamic equivalence, cultural adaptation, if you like, was developing in the same years as European multilingualism, using the same term, equivalence, but to solve an entirely different problem. The kind of equivalence that Eugene Nida wants people to use in the jungles for the Bible is not the same kind that people had to use in the European Commission. Completely different. But the same term was there, and they could read each other, understand and take from each other, and form a paradigm. A paradigm where people talk about translation using the same vocabulary with a basic understanding. The paradigm brought together those four things. And people were solving different problems, and often we didn't really understand because the jungles are not like Brussels yet. But the paradigm function. This book is based on paradigms, and I'm trying to present this so you get an idea of how paradigms work. It's a set of terms that enable us to talk about translation, to set up a conversation. It's not yet a solution. It's not yet the problem in itself, but it enables us to address a series of problems with a common language. And that is what has been happening throughout the history of translation theory. That's why this book is based on a series of chapters, each of which is focused on a different paradigm. To the extent that people in one paradigm will not understand people in the other paradigm. There will be serious misunderstanding when you cross from one to the other. And there sure is. There is lots of misunderstanding. Not just between theorists and practitioners, which is a huge misunderstanding both ways, but especially between theorists who are working on different problems in different contexts. Let me move to another example. You might be aware of the School of German Language Translation Theorists who come under this banner, Skopos theory. Skopos just means the aim or purpose of your translation. And the fundamental notion here is that when you translate, your work is determined, is governed, not by what's in the source text in the first place, but by what your client wants you to do, by what has to be achieved with the translation, by the purpose of the translation on the target side. I hope that's not new to you. I don't have a lot of time to explain the details. But this theory, really, there are early papers in the late 70s by Femer, to whom I pay homage. He died about a month ago now, and deserves sincere recognition for his courageous work in this paradigm. He's the main, Hans Femer was the main theorist behind this paradigm. Why did they insist that the source text is not the main determinant and that the target side purpose is? Why did Femer claim he had dethroned the source text? It's what a revolutionary does. You dethrone a king. Now, the king is no more. There's a new king out here. People in Japan change governments easily, I noticed. You know? But the emperor is untouchable. Okay. Well, okay, so a minor revolution then. Why did he do that? And I think he's quite right to do that. I sign up for that, fine, that's okay. And he's not saying just be free and do whatever you want. The theory says achieve the purpose that is required. If the purpose is to be very literal and philological, then you do that. Okay, so he's sometimes misinterpreted as saying, be free, my children, go out and do whatever you want. No, he says, follow the purpose of the translation, which may be equivalence or not. This is from a book by Christiane Nord called Translation as a Purposeful Action, I think. And you can see where we are. There is communication. There are two kinds, intracultural, within a culture, and cross-cultural, or intercultural, if you like. Here there are two kinds. It can be mediated, with a person there who is an expert, or direct, as I am talking with most of you. Okay? What is translatorial action is what translators do. What do translators do? Well, it's mediated cross-cultural communication. That's where we are. But in this theory, translatorial action, the adjective translatorial refers to the translator, can be with a translation, translational, or not. This means translators can produce translations, but they can also tell the client, I'm sorry, but your source text is a load of rubbish. Or it's a good try, but it's not going to work in Japan because Japanese culture is very different. This is when you do some advice or consulting. I can see what you want to do. Will you allow me to write a new text based on this? Or can I take this text and reduce it, or take out the references to American culture and put in references to Japanese culture? Or can I engage in terminological work to help the project? Or marketing research, which might come in here in an advanced or extended form of advice. The idea here was that translators do more than translate. That's pretty good. People before they didn't say that. Why did they say that? Well, I wonder if that's going to tell me. Because at the time, they could see that from the translation faculties in Germany, their graduates were going out into the marketplace, being trained to translate in a very narrow, prescriptive equivalence way, and were finishing up getting jobs doing many other things, such as people working in marketing, such as terminology. Lots went into the software sector and finished up doing engineering or localization projects or desktop publishing or handling the graphics in general. And others were required to do terminological work. The market spoke through the graduate students to the teachers saying, well, wait a minute, you have to train them to do more than translate. The market demands, at least in that period in mid-1980s Germany, pierced the academic armor, erupted into a new theory, dethroned the previous paradigm, and got people to think radically about what kind of cross-cultural communication is really necessary in industry. And I think that was a good revolution. I think we need more of it at the moment when we have new technologies coming into the industry and are not getting into the teaching process, into the academy. However, This is where I start to say bad things about people, okay? So I'm going to go really fast. I don't know if you should cite me. Anyway, I don't care. The German faculties were very big. They still are. That means, 5,000 students. 3 to 5, some are smaller, 3 to 5,000 students. That's a lot of power. Those are good academic jobs because full German professors since Bismarck are paid at the level of the haute bourgeoisie, the high, the rank below the aristocracy. Professor, you're like a general in the army if you're a professor in Germany. So you want your faculty to be your professor. You do not want your translation faculty to mix with a modern language faculty. I don't know if this is a touchy concern here. And they jealously guarded the distinction between learning a language or a literature and translation. They have separate buildings, separate professorships, separate publications, separate students, separate academic power. So to say, it looks really anodyne. Translators do more than translate is a market reality, but also a very efficient way of making sure you keep your jobs for your friends. Okay, academic